Hello everyone, and welcome to the Mega Magikarp YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to deeper details and build potential within Destiny 2. Today's video is a perk Mythbuster video where we look into a perk in the game and run it through all the number crunching and data points possible to figure out exactly what it does and how to best use it. If you haven't subscribed already, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be alerted when any video comes out. Before I really get into the meat of this video, I just want to really take a quick moment to dissect exactly what the purpose is. It started off closer to a rant about the perks in Destiny, then about community perception of perks and how conventional wisdom is taken as gospel instead of challenged, but I think the overall message that I want to convey before getting into anything specific is that the quote-unquote best role for any primary weapon ever, being Outlaw Rampage or something equivalent to that, is something that needs to be challenged more often, and people can look into further nuance of perks than just weapon perks that increase damage and or reload speed. That's the gist of this video. I know somebody's probably already downvoting based on the title alone without going 5 seconds to hear me out, but that's fine. If I use terminology that may sound like I'm trying to talk down on people, know that I'm not singling anyone out and I'm not talking down to anyone. This is more or less just a collective frustration on perk pool selection and commenting on the holistic sandbox. Take a look at the 7th Seraph Officer Revolver for just a moment, if you will. We'll get into more detail about this exact role, but for a moment, just look over the weapon, all the perks it has, specifically the firmly planted and time payload aspects. The other perks the weapon have aren't really the meat and potatoes for the argument that I'm trying to have. Fixate on that role for a moment. Think about what you'd do with it, if you'd keep it, if you'd dismantle it. Keep that in the back of your mind while we go into a little bit of story time. At the start of Season 10, there was a massive amount of disdain for the current season before it really even began to go into full swing, and I remember in going and sneaking looks on my phone between lines at the bank to see what the fuss was on Reddit. The weapons are bad was what I was parceling together between the headlines on multiple threads, and I couldn't wrap my hand around what would govern such a possible outcry from the community. Were they all just considerably lower base stat to make up for some crazy overpowered perk? Like, imagine if unnerfed overpowered Master of Arms was only on a sidearm with literally 10 in every stat, and Master of Arms was the only perk that it had. It'd be a silly novelty you try in quick play and never really touch again. In reality, as we all know, the reverse was true. The 7 Seraph weapons are fairly decent in base stats and are decent weapons in every respect except for one. They can't roll with the quintessential combination of a reload perk alongside of a damage buff perk. This was the point in which I actually got really annoyed at the overall narrative that gets spun about the game and the perks available on weapons. The game is about loot, weapons, and what you can do with those weapons or whatever activity you want to do. The issue that I bring up is that everybody always wants Outlaw Rampage, Rabbit Hit Multi-Kill Clip, Feeding Frenzy Kill Clip, so on and so forth. All of these different combinations that just feel like different spins on vanilla ice cream without giving a second thought to other perk combinations that exist. And the worst part is, these damage perks aren't even necessarily even any good in the highest end of PvE content and are arguably overkill for underleveled content. To give specific number rundowns on Rampage, each kill you get gives you a single stacking buff of Rampage, and each gives roughly 10% additional damage per stack, and 3 times gives a total buff of 33% additional damage. The normal duration of Rampage after a kill is 3.5 seconds. If you use Rampage spec on your weapon, it goes to 4.5 seconds. It's paired so often with Outlaw and similar reload perks because of how easy it becomes to chain together and maintain Rampage. In the instance that you need to do a very high-end content like a Grandmaster Nightfall or a Master Nightmare hunt though, you don't really want to go after the Outlaw Rampage weapons. Most of the best choices you can ask for are Rapid Hit or 4 times the Charm and Vorpal weapon primaries. Since your bullets to kill on even low-tier red bar mobs are usually so many that by the time that you get a single kill for the Rampage times 1, you're probably either low health or all the rest of the mobs are dead, and even if they aren't, that 10% additional damage is so minuscule that you're likely to get maybe like 1 less headshot to kill that at the most. And if you're not getting up to Rampage times 3, the perk, it just isn't any good. And even with all that said and done, if you don't need to run a champion mechanic on your primary like in a regular strike playlist, most of the time a primary weapon can get on just as well with a minor spec. Minor spec dealing a little more than 8% damage on any red bar mobs, which is just 3% less than Rampage times 1. Leaving a Hive Acolyte with a sliver of health with a 140 RPM hand cannon is frustrating. I get that for sure. But if you can devote a mod slot to getting through Acolytes or Vandals or Scions faster, in my eyes that just opens up weapon perk combinations to me. Once you get to Rampage times 2 and times 3, it's basically just overkilling enemies at that point. And even then, if overkill is your role that you're trying to facilitate, I think that I would just rather have a triple tap Demolitionist Ostringer over Outlaw Rampage right now. Not only because the uptime that you can get with a triple tap Demolitionist weapon is equal to, if not more than, an Outlaw Rampage weapon, what between the extended magazine of triple tap and the auto reload function of Demolitionist, but with Destiny 2 in a weird bounty focused state right now, Demolitionist is probably one of the best perks you can ask for because of the elemental kills that you'll be able to facilitate with your grenades, as well as specific grenade kill bounties. I'm not a fan of that either. I'm just gonna put that out there. Destiny 2 is in a really weird state right now with the bounty focus, but that's a discussion for another time. So it's too low of an impact for most of the difficult content, and it's overkill to be of any real use in generic low intensity PvE, so at that point, what is it even good for? Honestly, it feels like a holdover of Forsaken era thought processes where the damage numbers were much higher. For those of you that started during Shadowkeep, just imagine that instead of Rampage 1, 2, and 3, it was Rampage 2, 4, and 6. That was the effective numerical damage output that it gave. Rampage times 3 back in Forsaken was 65% additional damage. Low tier mobs even had higher crit multipliers, meaning you could reasonably use a Rampage weapon in super high-end content for vastly increased performance at range, killing over-leveled red bar mobs, increased efficacy against yellow bar mobs once you get the stacks going. But ever since the complete slashing of Rampage's effectiveness, in my eyes, it feels like a new player trap or an enfranchised player's formerly true thought processes that just haven't tried anything different. The same thing happens to this day of a lot of people still prioritizing hand cannon range over all else due to old interviews with Bungie about Destiny 1 sandbox from years ago, even though at this point in time, stability has more of a benefit to your hand cannon than range does. Am I trying to imply that Rampage and similar raw universal damage perks are bad? No. No, they're not. They're definitely worth slots on most primary weapons, but when you automatically discount the capacity of new weapon combinations because you can't have your 50th primary weapon with Outlaw Rampage, that's where I start to take issue. If we get a season where autos have anti-barrier again, or we get one where, of all things, rockets have anti-barrier, I'm going to want a disruption break model of those weapons, with some kind of way of maintaining upkeep that doesn't require kills to make it work. Auto-loading holster, triple tap, Genesis, something. Okay, maybe not Genesis unless it gets buffed, but still. It's just genuinely upsetting that a lot of people will leave cool perks to the wayside because it's not a reload perk with a damage-based perk. Looking into Elemental Capacitor in particular, especially on Void subclass mains like me on my Titan, where you just conjured the equivalent of 2 stability masterworks onto your gun just by you playing a Void subclass. That perk gets guns sharded so much when I know there's plenty of Void subclass mains out in the game that can use that perk to their benefit and no one gives it a second thought. I do think that the other 2 modes of Elemental Capacitor are a little bit underwhelming just because you could make up for those stats that you don't have with mods, but the Void one is super unique and you can't replicate that anywhere else. The biggest factor I can see as to why these perks still see so much use is just how utterly easy it is to slap them onto a loadout and call it good. Here I have 5 different reload speeds of Ostringer on screen. This Ostringer doesn't have a reload masterwork, but it does have Tactical Mag as a selectable perk, which gives plus 10 to reload, but we're only going to use that at the end. The first reload speed is the base reload with no reload perks on the weapon or armor mods. Then we have normal hand cannon reloader, then enhanced reloader, then outlaw with no reloader on the gauntlets, then enhanced reloader with tactical mag selected on my hand cannon for the plus 10 reload, or the effective amount of a reload masterwork. I want to take a look at those last 2 compared to each other in particular. You look at these side by side, the Outlaw one is faster by a full 28 frames. So in 60 frames per second, that's the difference of a little less than half a second. A half a second difference in order for you to reload your weapon that doesn't require a weapon slot is honestly worth it in my eyes. That one isn't dependent on you getting kills with it. The real difference between these 2 reload speeds goes deeper than the perks themselves and has more to do with the setup. How many times have you gotten on Destiny 2 and you just kind of threw on weapons that you want to use? It's likely that the perks that you chose on those weapons are ones that are very self-sufficient, like Outlaw Rampage. They don't require one of my build videos to make work. They don't require intensive knowledge of the game to work. They just do what they do, and they do it well enough. Most of the players who don't know what's good won't even bother to look up a video like this one. And the ones who do know what's good and are extremely micromanaging of their builds like how I do, most likely have the same thought process that I do when curating a loadout for a high-end activity or a build. They're not looking at Rampage in their playbook for difficult content. And so I guess that means that I'm just taking a moment to make this a PSA for those of you in the middle of the road. Those players that get every seasonal title but don't necessarily know the ins and outs of the games and all the intricacies that it has. Please please just take a look at the perks that are available in this game and see that there's more than Outlaw Rampage. There's so much more that you can do with this game than just me make gun, pew harder, and reload fast. Before I sign off today, I want to circle back over to that officer revolver that I was talking about earlier in the video. I imagine most people would have dismantled the thing without a second thought. I'm going to do a quick walkthrough on it. The weapon is in a bit of a rough archetype right now, but as far as 180 round per minute precision frame hand cannons are concerned, I'm actually really excited about this particular roll. First off, it has firmly planted, perk reads, increased accuracy, stability, and handling when firing when crouched. You really don't need to be a Spectral Blades hunter to make this perk work. And you don't need to play like you're playing an older Call of Duty game where you need to go prone and trudge around like a snail for it to be good either. To not be super technical, the best way to think about firmly planted, you basically reset your accuracy cone when you're crouched. Your gun's bloom is reset when you actually move to crouch, alongside general handling and stability buffs. Your recoil direction is set to 100% vertical when you crouch. That bit's not too relevant because this is a 180 round per minute hand cannon which have vertical recoil anyway. But it's good for any auto rifle that happens to get that perk. If you remember the old counterbalance perk from Destiny 1, it's basically that. Resetting your bloom on your hand cannon in exchange for crouch strafing, I'd call that a good trade if you're utilizing it properly, since when you fire the weapon quickly, you're extending out your accuracy cone and your bloom. By the simple act of just quickly crouching for a split second, you automatically reset that back to where you were initially firing accuracy was, meaning that your next shots are going to be very consistent and reliable. The other perk that the weapon has, Time Payload, perk reads, projectiles attached to enemies explode after a short delay. It's an explosive payload that didn't have its coffee in the morning, and most people see it as a bad perk. I imagine the True Prophecy back in year 1 left a bad taste in most people's mouth. When you look at what it's doing in PvP though, you get all of the benefits of explosive payload without almost any of the downside. The delay of the explosion in ideal circumstances won't mess with your time to kill, you get the explosion damage extending your effective range, but the most important thing is that you're dealing 2 sources of damage over the course of a single trigger pull. 180 rounds per minute is basically doubled to 360 with all of the obnoxious screen shake and blinding effects of the explosive rounds on the second bullet and the regular annoying flinch on the first, just chaining together. The only reason I feel like it's not a good counter sniper primary is most snipers you'll fight are at ranges where hand cannons don't really pull their weight, but if someone's being a more aggressive sniper, then by all means give them a fireworks show while crouch strafing with a firmly planted buff. One last point before I sign off. I know my argument was focused on Rampage, and that role I just went over was a PvP role, and Rampage is generally seen as a more PvE focused perk, and I've got to tell you, Time Payload is really good in PvE too. Time Payload still gives those benefits of increased range, that doesn't change, but it even deals more damage in PvE. I've got a table linked in the description of the video for how it affects your weapon damage. It's not my table. Be sure to thank user RaxorTJE for the info. Don't use firmly planted in PvE though. Its benefits aren't good there. On that gun in particular, you're better off with 4 times the charm, threat detector, or ambitious assassin. My personal favorite one of these is 4 times the charm. The weapon is especially potent with Warmind cells since it's a 7 seraph weapon, so run some of those mods with that and give it a whirl. So, how do you think I did? What other thoughts do you have on the matter? Is there any other ideas on your side? What kind of perks are you interested in now that I've brought this up? Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I'll see you on the next one.